Renata Santos believed every palate hid a knot of memory waiting to be tugged loose. Some chefs plated nostalgia, grilled cheese like childhood, a tiramisu that recalled first love. Renata's gifts were darker. She had taught herself to layer acids, fats, and aromatics in ways that teased out half-forgotten scenes the mind had locked away for its own protection. Most people tasted her food, shivered, then told her later, often in a confessional hush, about whatever long-buried grief the dish had unearthed. They called the experience cathartic. Renata called it medicine. Her pop-up, Mnemosyne, drifted from city to city, always in an abandoned space, a gutted brokerage downtown, a derelict greenhouse on the outskirts, an old ferry idling at a shuttered pier. She dressed each temporary dining room with the same minimal set, unvarnished pine tables, industrial pendant lights, a single speaker looping faint white noise like the hush of blood in the ears. And every service ended with Renata stepping out of the back, sleeves rolled, to watch guests stagger into the night lighter than when they'd arrived, as though she'd siphoned ballast from their chests. On a muggy September afternoon in Boston, her booking app lit up with a request unlike the usual smattering of curious couples and bereavement support groups. Table for 6, full buyout, the note read. Strictly private, menu to recreate the valley during the monsoon, utmost discretion appreciated. The request included a wire transfer larger than any she'd seen and a list of ingredients so specific it felt like a code. Green tamarind, musty jackfruit seeds, burnt rice powder, the fungus that grows on bamboo after a lightning strike. Renata hesitated. She avoided corporate groups. Too many sought novelty without a willingness to open their scars. Yet something about the phrasing, recreate the valley, piqued her. The address she was to serve in was not her usual wandering venue, but a decommissioned observatory 30 miles outside the city. The clients had secured the lease, handled permits, even arranged a refrigerated courier from a Hong Kong market for the rarer produce. All they required was her hand. She accepted. The day before service, she cycled to the observatory to scout the kitchen. Granite sky, ragweed whipping in crosswinds. The observatory's dome glinted dull pewter. Inside, the main chamber had been cleared. A long maple table placed under the yawning eye of the telescope mount. Speakers waited in each corner, but instead of the soft hiss she preferred, they played nothing. Silence boomed. A man in a linen shirt approached, introducing himself as Archer. Salt and pepper beard, a posture disciplined enough to betray military background despite the relaxed clothes. He handed her a folded packet. "Flavor map," he said. "We need precision." When she asked why, he answered only, "These dishes will unlock something we misplaced. You're the locksmith." That night, Renata sat in her sublet reading the flavor map. A grid of taste, scent, temperature, texture. Each cell corresponded to an emotion, or, more accurately, a fracture in emotion. Sour metal for shame, overripe fruit for dread, infant sweet milk for feelings of safety soon revoked. Whoever compiled it knew the neural highways of gustation as intimately as she did. She sensed a fellow cartographer, albeit one tracing a route back to something ominous. Renata prepped from dawn, until the first stars welted in the sky. She toasted the jackfruit seeds until they smelled like wet earth under a fallen tree. She boiled goat bones with green tamarind until the stock jarred the back molars with dental pain. She foraged rain-slick pine needles to smoke the eel. The final dish, dessert, was the simplest. A custard blanketed in ash made by charring sticky rice, meant to taste like a hearth gone cold. At 7, the 6 guests filed in. They wore no uniforms or matching suits, just the nondescript armor of middle age, chinos, neat dresses, cardigans thin enough to fold into glove compartments. Yet they moved in a pattern no civilian group did, orbiting one another with unvoiced cues, scanning exits automatically. Soldiers, Renata thought, or something adjacent. Besides Archer, there was Petra, tall and flinty, who chose the seat facing both door and window. Malik, whose hands trembled until they splayed on the table's edge. Twins, Lydia and Lyle, who spoke only to each other in compressed asides. And, last, Jonah, younger, gaze skating over every surface except the people he'd arrived with. Renata stepped forward. "The courses are sequenced, no substitutions." She waited for a nod, then retreated behind a sliding panel to the prep galley. She'd installed microphones under the table earlier, a precaution she never took with normal diners. Tonight, she wanted to hear the memories hatch in real time. First course, fermented bamboo fungus, coriander, lightning scar bitterness. She plated with tweezers, the fungus still faintly sparking from a reaction she'd coaxed with carbonated water. When the guests tasted it, the room filled with a brittle hum, like cicadas. Through the monitor, she heard Petra exhale sharply. That smell, river mud, right before the drop zone. Archer, "Hold it, don't rush, let it come on its own." Renata felt her pulse quicken. She wasn't sure whether excitement or alarm drove it. She sliced the smoked eel for course 2, brushing it with a glaze of tamarind stock reduced until it shone black. In the dining chamber, the guests sat very still, eyes unfocused yet brimming, as if each eel strip were a slide projected against the backs of their skulls. Jonah whispered, "I thought the houses were empty." "No," Malik said, voice like stone striking flint. "Remember, the blue tarp in the courtyard, children under it, breathing so quiet we mistook them for bodies already." Silence. Then Lyle spoke. The first word Renata had heard him address to anyone but his sister. "We were told to clear all witnesses. Our radios crackled. No exceptions." A covert massacre, Renata realized. The valley, the monsoon, all contextual clues clicked together. Mercenaries, intelligence officers. Whoever they were, they carried an atrocity sealed behind amnesia. A defense mechanism, perhaps pharmacological, perhaps self-imposed. And they had hired her to pick the lock because guilt, like infection, brands the flesh until it must be lanced. Course 3 was goat bone consommé poured tableside over morsels of cassava bread. The stock fogged the room with sour iron humidity. Renata saw Archer steady Petra's elbow as she convulsed once, a silent sob. "Lieutenant Kelly," Petra muttered. "He torched the grain stores, said it would starve rebels, but it was the harvest for half the valley." Lydia, "I helped him line the oil cans. God, I can smell the diesel on my hands." Renata's own hands shook as she returned to the kitchen. She'd read history. New atrocities were often footnotes under bland headings. Collateral, pacification. But hearing it freshly unearthed felt like standing in a mausoleum listening to coffins splinter. She tasted the broth left in her ladle, and a flicker of memory stabbed her. The night her older brother had slammed the family car into a guardrail, drunk. Renata had suppressed the screech of metal for years. Now a phantom odor of ruptured plastic airbags filled her lungs. Her dishes had never affected her personally before. She'd always been the conductor, not the instrument. Tonight, the trauma didn't recognize the boundary. Course 4. Grilled plantain with jackfruit seed crumble, finished with a mist of iodized brine. On the monitor, Jonah gripped the edge of the table, knuckles bloodless. "The river," he croaked. Bodies drifted down like dolls. Plastic ties on the wrists. His chin dropped to his chest. He looked about 20 despite the 30+ etched on his birth certificate. Archer spoke calmly. "Stay with it. Our debt requires exact remembrance." Renata wondered if the group sought some private absolution ritual, but their method felt systematic, almost bureaucratic. She recalled reports of experimental therapies where veterans relived suppressed combat memories under psychedelics. Had these 6 repurposed her cuisine into a truth serum? Course 5. Only dessert remained after, the ash custard. Renata lifted the pot from the sous vide bath. Steam wreathed her like a spectral cloak. She felt an ache in her sternum, as though she too had been in that valley, stepping over tarp-covered bodies. She realized she was absorbing their psychic runoff, a proximity infection. She pressed a hand to her chest until her breath steadied. Out in the chamber, conversation had dwindled to brittle fragments. Malik. Truck's battery died when we tried to leave. We dumped gear to lighten the push downhill. I left my notebook there. Lydia murmured, "Evidence." "Evidence stays," Archer said. "Cannot resurface." Renata paused, ladle mid-air. That phrase, "cannot resurface," clanged with bureaucratic chill. They hadn't come to confess. They'd come to catalog, like archaeologists dusting relics so they could bury them deeper in a museum basement. She plated the custard in 6 ceramic crocks, each topped with a spoonful of rice ash resembling volcanic silt. Before carrying the tray out, she slipped a 7th crock into her coat pocket. At the table, she placed the desserts. The guests sat rigid. The telescope mount overhead looked like a giant vertebra fused to the ceiling, frozen in perpetual search. Archer raised his spoon. "Final pass." They tasted. One by one, their eyes fluttered half-closed. A collective inhale. The word massacre threaded soft through the air as if exhaled by the dome itself. Jonah spoke first, voice paralyzed. "Villagers ran to the church. We locked the doors. Petrol bombs through the windows. Screams like goats slaughtered." Petra added, "I fired at silhouettes behind stained glass. Hoped they were illusions." Lyle whispered, "This is it. Every piece." Renata waited for something like gratitude or remorse. Instead, Archer pulled a slim device from his lap, a gray oblong with a blinking red diode. He pressed it once, and Renata heard a faint triple chirp, like a recorder's beep. Petra looked up, eyes clearing as though a drug's effects had receded. "Did we get it?" "It's stored," Archer said. "Full sensory transcript." He turned to the others. "You will sleep tonight. When we wake, the memories will be gone again." Renata felt cold flood her spine. They weren't freeing themselves. They were harvesting, recording the recollections so they could delete them anew, perhaps as blackmail insurance or some twisted personal archive. Her food was merely the keycard to a vault most human minds kept shut for sanity. They'd return to civilized lives, consultancies, academia, maybe politics, unburdened, while the valley remained a buried datum in a classified report. She stepped forward. "You asked for discretion," she said, voice low but resonant in the acoustic dome. "I agreed, thinking you sought healing. This," she gestured at the blinking device, "is something else." Archer regarded her with measured pity. "Chef, the soul can't bear certain weights continuously. We pay for periodic purges. You supplied the reagent, handsomely compensated, I might add." "What about accountability?" she asked. "You massacred civilians. You can't just erase that." "We don't erase, we store, off-site. For the day, history requires it." Renata's stomach lurched at the clinical phrasing. "And if history never calls? Then it sleeps. Better for everyone." Petra interjected, gentle, almost pleading. "You of all people understand trauma. If we carried this hourly, we'd end ourselves. Would that undo the past?" "No, so we opt for stasis." Renata sensed the argument's seduction. Yet she thought of the villagers, unlabeled bones under monsoon soil, who had no option for selective amnesia. Anger ignited in her chest like alcohol catching flame. She reached into her coat and withdrew the 7th custard. "There's one more course," she announced. Archer frowned. "Not on the map." "An improvisation," she said, placing it at the center of the table. Inside, instead of ash-topped custard, lay a dark puree studded with flecks of crimson. She lied breezily. "Tamilo fruit. Rare. Increases memory retention exponentially for several hours when combined with heat-denatured casein." Archer's eyes narrowed. "Not part of our contract." "Consider it a gift," she said, stepping back. Unsure, they hesitated. Jonah, still trembling, reached first, spooning a mouthful. The others followed. Group conformity stronger than suspicion. When they swallowed, Renata spoke. "It's just custard," she admitted. "But I salted it with micrograms of physostigmine, an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. It prevents the formation of memory gaps for the next 24 hours. Panic rippled around the table. Petra knocked over her glass. Archer's hand went to his pocket. Renata saw the bulge of a sidearm under his linen jacket. "Why would you do this?" he asked, voice steady but seething. "Because mausoleums shouldn't have revolving doors," she said. "Tonight, you leave with every detail you came to exhume. Live with it, like the valley's dead live with absence." Lyle gagged, pressing fingers to his throat. "Induce vomiting," he rasped to Lydia. "Too late," Renata said. "Absorption's immediate through oral mucosa." Archer raised the pistol but kept it below table level. Renata's pulse hammered, yet she held his gaze. She'd calculated that violence was unlikely. Killing her now would entangle them with local law enforcement, records, investigations, attention. They excelled at staying invisible. Silent calculations flickered across Archer's face. He lowered the weapon. "You've made an enemy." "You were never friends," she replied. He collected the recorder, slipped it into a lead-lined pouch. "We will neutralize the drug's effect." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but not before dawn. Tonight you dream only one dream." Jonah's face curled in despair. He clamped hands over his ears as if trying to muffle an internal scream. Malik stared at the custard bowl like it contained a grenade. Renata turned, heart rattling, and walked to the kitchen, expecting footfalls behind her, a rough grip, cold metal. None came. A minute later she heard the dome door open, then close, wind howling through the gap before it latched. The guests had fled into the night, into the memories that would dog them until morning's neurochemistry rebalanced, if it ever did. She slumped against a prep table. Her hands smelled of tamarind and gunmetal, even though she'd touched neither weapons nor battlefields. She considered calling a journalist, a priest, the authorities. But the only concrete evidence was a single custard spoon with traces of physostigmine and 6 pallets heavy with ghosts. Hardly admissible. Renata washed the dishes methodically, water scalding. She packed her knives, wiped surfaces, and killed the breaker. In the dark, the telescope's silhouette loomed, still pointed at a starless zenith, as though gaping for answers from a universe indifferent to human contrition. Before leaving, she left a note on the table. "History is hungry." She then dropped her own recorder, a pocket field mic she'd hidden in her apron, into the custard bowl, submerging it shame-deep in the creamy ash. Outside, dawn yawned pink at the horizon. Renata inhaled crisp air stripped of kitchen odors, hoping it might purge the valley's smoke lodged in her throat. She knew she'd carry this night within her, no selective purge available, yet she felt lighter than she expected. Perhaps accountability, however small, had its own buoyancy. She unlocked her van, loaded her equipment. When the engine turned over, the radio came alive with static that sounded eerily like the white noise loop she played in her dining rooms. She left it on, a soundtrack for the miles ahead, each mile a thin layer of ash settling over memory. But not enough, she vowed, to let it ever disappear.